Pedro Alonso Lopez, a man appropriately called the Monster of the Andes, was a Colombian serial killer who claimed to have racked up one of the biggest body counts of all time, saying that he murdered over 300 people all across several countries. And worst of all, he's a free man, and nobody knows where he is. So I'll start off by saying that when I make videos about foreign cases, I do a bit of translation in Japanese, and people ask why and how I was able to learn a new language. I learned through traditional means, but I also used various apps along the way. When it comes to those language learning apps, Babbel is one of the best that there is. One of the most important parts to learning a language is conversation practice. When you're not in that country, it's pretty often hard to get that practice in. Babbel helps with that by teaching through using real-life language and dialogue with lessons all written by real-life teachers. Summer vacation is already here for a lot of the college students out there, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this are planning on going somewhere this summer. Going to a new country comes with a lot of new experiences, and one way to get the best out of those experiences is to really make the most of it by learning the local language. So figure out where you'd like to go and start learning that language. I've still been messing around with learning Turkish myself, so I can greet all the Turks out there who may be watching this video. Merhaba. After only 3 weeks throughout these 10 to 15 minute lessons, you'll already be started on speaking your new language. You can even decide how you want to learn your language by using podcasts, games, live classes, and more. Babbel goes the extra mile by intertwining teachings about the culture in with the language. Think holidays, traditions, food, stuff like that. See where it takes you, I think you'll be surprised. Check out Babbel's offer in the description to get up to 65% off of your subscription. Thank you to Babbel for sponsoring this video. Pedro Lopez, the Monster of the Andes, may just be the worst serial killer there has ever been. It's still up for debate, but he's undoubtedly at least one of the worst serial killers there's ever been, both in terms of body count and the horrific ways he treated his victims before their ultimate deaths. For the longest time, Lopez's actions went mostly unchecked, with very few people knowing what he had done, if any. It wasn't until 1992, when a freelance journalist met and interviewed him in prison, that the world would finally come to know who exactly he was and what he had done. The case soon received international attention. A number of interviews were conducted with Lopez, and they were ultimately published in the Chicago Tribune in 1992 before being published in all sorts of other magazines and papers as well. Since then, Lopez's legacy has been fairly cemented. We don't know a whole lot about Lopez's early life, but we do know that he was born in Colombia, the 7th kid among 13 siblings. According to his mom, he started out as a polite young boy, aiming to be a teacher one day. However, his upbringing was not the best by any means. His mother was strict, overbearing, and cruel. But even so, that wasn't much compared to the outside world during the 1950s in Colombia. The country was experiencing a tumultuous civil war, with acts of violence being rampant in the area. Lopez, as a child, would often see prostitutes in his neighborhood, sometimes even seeing them in the act, something that he claims damaged him psychologically. He wound up with demented, perverted thoughts that culminated in him violating his little sister when he was only 8 years old in 1957. It was at this point that his mother kicked him out of the house for good. Unsure of where to go, the 8-year-old boy decided to travel to Bogota, the capital of Colombia. A seemingly kind older man decided to take him in and give him a place to stay. However, as you may expect, this man turned out to be a sexual deviant with an unhealthy attraction to, let's say, much younger people. He reportedly violated Lopez again and again over an extended period of time, only to eventually kick him out of the house later. When he was 12 years old, Lopez met and befriended an American family who eventually decided to take him in, after which they enrolled him into a school for orphans. According to Lopez, it was here that a male teacher violated him as well, after which he decided to run away once again, disappearing for a full 2 years this time. However, other associates of Lopez claim that, during this time, he had actually run away with a teacher. Which account is correct is still currently unknown. We don't know much about what happened to Lopez from this point until when he turned 18 years old. It was then that he was making his living by stealing cars and taking them to local illegal chop shops. His American foster parents tried to help him out and get him back onto the straight path, but to no avail. After a while, Lopez was expelled from school. Afterwards, he was caught and arrested for grand theft auto. He was ultimately sentenced to a 7-year sentence. While in prison, he claims that he was violated by a whole group of 4 men, something that sent his mental state into even more of a downward spiral than it already was. Lopez decided that he would take revenge on the 4 men and vowed to make them all pay. In prison, he tracked down each and every one of them and killed them all. He killed all of them with a knife that he somehow acquired in prison and had a measly 2 years tacked onto his sentence. The revenge killings were labeled as self-defense. It's believed that his early deviancy, his fear and hatred of women thanks to the mistreatment by his mother, his vile mistreatment in prison, and his newfound taste for murder really shaped the man that he would become from then on. After eventually being released from prison, Lopez decided to move to Peru. It was here that his horrific crimes would begin to take place. His combined childhood trauma, his hatred of women, and his new taste for murder led him to targeting young girls. He mainly went after girls from local indigenous tribes, likely thinking that nobody would investigate their disappearances. Unfortunately, in most cases, he was correct. He kidnapped, assaulted, violated, and finally murdered a number of girls that would shock and disgust any normal human being. Well, hell, even killing one person would be enough to disgust the average person. But Lopez ended the lives of an astonishing amount of people, claiming that he killed over 100 in total during this spree alone. After all of these murders, in 1978, he was in the process of kidnapping yet another young girl from an indigenous tribe when he was finally captured. A group of local traders caught him in the act, subdued him, and decided to take matters into their own hands. They decided that a man like this didn't deserve to live and were set to finish him off themselves. However, it was at this point that a missionary intervened. Little did this missionary know that by saving this one man's life, it would result in many, many more being ended. The missionary was somehow able to convince the tribe that killing was wrong, no matter what the circumstances. The pleading actually worked, and they released Lopez in the end. Pedro traveled all over the surrounding 3 nations, Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia, and killed more girls left and right as he did so. He says that, by the end, he killed about 100 in each country. His MO stayed mostly the same throughout his run as a serial killer, usually looking for victims in broad daylight, claiming that communicating with them during the day made him appear less evil. He ended up getting so cocky that he would approach girls even in large crowds, later on kidnapping them. He would lure them away with toys before taking them, violating them, strangling them, and burying them in sloppily put together shallow graves. Lopez has said that, at this point, he was killing about 3 people each week. He wound up in Ecuador in the end, saying that he preferred the girls there, specifically stating that, quote, "I like the girls in Ecuador. They are more gentle and trusting, more innocent. I walked among the markets searching for a girl with a certain look on her face, a look of innocence and beauty. She would be a good girl, always working with her mother. I followed them, sometimes for 2 or 3 days, waiting for the moment when she was left alone. When these girls went missing, it was mostly thought that they were most likely either victims of human trafficking or that they had simply run away. Finally, though, Lopez was arrested again. A flash flood had cleared away the soil on one of his mass grave sites, exposing the bodies of many of the missing girls. Immediately afterwards, either not knowing of the discovery or simply not caring, Lopez went right back to kidnapping. But by this point, everyone nearby was on full alert, knowing the final fate of the previous missing girls. He was caught in the act again, trying to lure his next victim away, a 10-year-old. Upon being arrested, he fully confessed his crimes to an undercover officer that was posing as his cellmate in jail. He was convicted on 3 counts of murder, but he boldly confessed that this wasn't anywhere near the total amount. He had more likely killed about 300, he said. Initially, the authorities didn't really believe the scope of the crimes that he had claimed to have committed. They thought that surely he was just completely insane. Fair assumption. Nobody would ever think that someone would have actually killed that amount of people. But Lopez was prepared to prove his claims. He led the police out to one of his mass grave sites, showing them where 57 victims had been buried. Soon after, he was charged with 110 counts of murder. However, it was fully believed that this wasn't the total amount of his victims. There may have been hundreds more. This was simply all they could charge him with at the moment. He was sentenced to a mere 20 years in prison, which was actually the maximum they would give for this crime. Lopez, after serving about 18 years, it's kind of unclear, was freed by the Ecuadorian government. Surprisingly, he was released on good behavior, or so he claims. There are many conflicting statements about the dates, the amount of time he served, the reason he was released, and where he went afterwards. In the end, though, it's quite clear that he was released after serving not even 1 month for each of the victims he killed and was free to roam again. It's believed that he was once again deported to Colombia after being arrested as an illegal immigrant. But after being back in Colombia, he was arrested in relation to the case of a 20-year-old murder. He finally spent about 4 more years locked up, but this time in a psychiatric facility. He was, likely accurately, deemed to be insane and an obvious danger to those around him. It was during this time that he ended up participating in the interviews with the freelance journalists that would eventually go on to become famous worldwide. He spoke of his awful upbringing, his demented thoughts as a child, and the incidents that would go on to shape him into the monster he became. He told them of his MO in meticulous detail. He said that he would follow a child for usually 2 or 3 days before eventually luring her away with what he called a pretty, shining trinket, as soon as he could catch her alone. He then took them to the edge of town and claims that he showed them love and affection until the sun started to rise. It was at that point he would violate and strangle them, saying that he needed the light in order to see the look in their eyes as their lives slipped away. It would have been wasted in the dark. I had to watch them by daylight, he said. He said that the killings were, quote, divine, and that only another killer could fully comprehend the way he felt in those moments. Afterwards, he would usually keep the bodies around for quite some time, having what he called parties with them, until he eventually got bored of them, buried them, and went out to find his next victim. After years in a psychiatric hospital, he was somehow declared sane and released on a mere $50 bail. There were certain conditions that he was supposed to follow upon his release, but he didn't abide by them. And then he simply vanished, never to be seen again. Interpol was not very happy with this and requested that the Colombian authorities arrest him once again after a murder took place in 2002 that fit his MO. He is currently listed as wanted, but he has yet to be found. He is a free man once again. As of the writing of this video, his whereabouts are not currently known. He'd be about 73 by this point, meaning he very well could have died by natural causes by now. Some speculate that somebody probably caught him in the act of a kidnapping and took justice into their own hands. However, this is all pure speculation. He may still be out there somewhere, he may not be. He could very well have exaggerated his victim count for all we know. Until the bodies are all found, we may never know for sure. However, it is known that he has killed, at the very least, 70 people, in horrific ways that we can't even begin to imagine. Once again, thank you for watching my video, I really appreciate it. If you thought it was interesting, please give it a like, it helps the algorithm, and comment if you want. If you like content like this, feel free to subscribe, I make a lot of it, pretty much every week. If you want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon account which I keep linked in the description below where you can see every episode both early and uncensored. Speaking of which, shout out to the top patrons. We have Hybrid Concepts, AMCMT, Balls, Rick Torres, Farias, Tang, Sash Johnson, Jewel G, Wafrans, Jules Latona, Arctic Cat, Alan Damiani, Adrian Lawley, Winnicott, Marsh, Buffazerk, Jewel Movchan, Rinsenstein, Kim Peak, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Skooky Maine, Jackie, Teresa Ferguson, and Mark Barnett. You guys are all fantastic. And once again, shout out to Babbel for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check out the link in the description to get 65% off of your subscription. Thank you, and good night.